Good.
All right, fellow YouTubers, thank you for another episode of Atheists Having Cocktails with Christians. This is kind of a newer one where I'm not talking to any metal bands or musicians I've enjoyed or metal, connoisseurs in the Christian realm. I'm sitting here with hopefully a new friend, James Wilcox. He's an American actor who has been on The Equalizer, Gossip Girl, House of Cards, Mr. Robot, and plenty more. I did see one thing I was super excited about. You got to do a little short sketch with John Oliver from last week tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Did you see the episode?
I haven't. I've seen the episode. I just don't remember it all. But a huge fan of John Oliver. So I want to say thank you for coming on the show tonight. And man, let's have some good conversation.
Right on, dude. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate what I saw from you and Joel and some of your previous runs with Jimmy P. Brown. And then with George Ochoa. I've wanted to get into that Roger Martinez one. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I've really enjoyed just the genuine conversation that's gone on, and it's all been really good. And cheers.
Cheers. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm going with I just polished off this bottle of High West Rye.
Ooh,
so
is it American bourbon?
This is going to be from. Gosh, you called me out on that one. Doggone.
Huh.
Where it specifically it's from, I don't remember. I just remember it's very good.
Nice. Yeah, I'm really
Utah.
Oh, nice. Weird.
Yeah, there it is.
Weird state to have good bourbon from. You know what I mean?
And unless I'm just getting it from like the distributor, but whatever, it's good. Yeah, High West Distillery, Park City, Utah.
Yeah,
it's very good.
Awesome. I'll have to try some sometime. All right,
right
so
on.
give me a little backstory on you.
Sure.
You were watching the show, and what made you kind of want to reach out and give me your thoughts on why you want to be on the show tonight.
Honestly, man, when I was listening to Joel's podcast, Imaginary Music, and I heard that you're on it. It was a very different take on it. Mm-hmm. He's usually doing musicians. Occasionally, he has somebody that's not a musician. But I saw that you guys had just some great, conversation. Where typically you see like atheists and Christians. I mean, at least in our heads, there's always this there has to be some sort of pull and animosity. But man, I enjoy philosophy. I enjoy science. I'm obviously still in the religious sector, a theist. And just being able to have just good, respectable conversation is something that's getting harder and harder to do in the American culture. And so I love that about it. And so, you were asking some really good questions on that show. And when I ended up on Joel's show, I just started thinking, I was like, man, I'm not like a musician or anything, but if it's worth his time, it'd be fun to be on that program. Because I've wrestled with some of those hard questions before that you've also wrestled with. And, I respect, you gotta have room to doubt, and you can't really know who you are unless you run through some of that doubt, and if you end up on the other side, there's no faith there, that's who you are.
I think that's the main thing I try and get across when I'm talking to Christians, whether either receptive or not. It's that how can you just wholeheartedly, no research, just based on faith, swallow it and live your life according to it. When, I'm not trying to rag on Christians, but most Christians don't even know the majority of what their book says, let alone anything else through history that can contradict what that book might say or might not say. So it's actually funny based on the interview with Jimmy. I know nothing of rabbinical studies. I know nothing about other than Jewish culture and whatnot. So I actually just reached out to a rabbi in around my neighborhood who I actually was like, hey man, I'd like to come and do an interview with you, but I actually want to maybe do an afternoon study with you on rabbinical, law and everything you guys believe, so that way I know what I want to ask you, because that's my thing. I want to learn as well. Conversations, if I can give information, great. If I can learn information, great. There's nothing wrong with obtaining everything to then making a clear-cut decision.
Dude, I can't agree more. That's the thing, is we cannot be afraid to look at all sources of information that exist out there. Because at the end of the day, I'm somebody who's always digging for truth. I want to know what the truth of something is. And I think this is one of those hard questions that you could probably throw out there to many religious people, Christians, I'm guessing. But if somehow it could be definitively proved that God did not exist,
Mm-hmm.
how would Christians answer that question? And now, obviously, throwing it's kind of a dumb question, so you can't prove it. You
No,
can't
it's
prove
actually
God.
it's a
You can't
great
not prove
question.
God.
It's a
Yeah,
great question because that's actually, the burden of proof isn't on me. It's on the believers. It's on the people that say, I definitely know from point A to point Z in my life and then after the fact, what's going to happen and where we're going to go and where I'm going to spend my afterlife or eternity or wherever. That's the
or
hardest
whatever you think about that.
with everything in this world that we don't know about, how can anybody, including myself, boldly say, when I die, when this body dies and decomposes, I know what happens. Nobody does.
Hmm.
We can have the faith, we can have ideas, we can have good intentions, we can have so many other things that we hope will happen. But at
Hmm.
the end of the day, it's going to be an individual journey between your death, my death, and everyone's death. And we either don't wake up or we could wake up as a caterpillar. The Hindus have it right. You know what I mean?
They got it right.
I mean that's just my train of thought is that, man, there's with
Sure.
so many differences in with the Torah and the Kabbalah and the Bible and mystic Hinduism and Krishna and all these other things. There's
Hmm.
so many other options out there that I don't think anybody has it right.
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
We could definitely look at that and say, I mean, at least for me, like God to me is at least, when I start thinking about the universe, I told you before, like texting, I love the things of science. I love
Yeah.
what science is discovering. I love what's out there. And so just from a scientific point of view, one of those theories then being like the experience of like higher dimensionality, which
Mhm.
it was conveyed through a film I really enjoy, Interstellar, in a certain way. So
Okay.
if God exists, he at least exists at the bare number of, dimensions the universe exists in,
Very
or
much
plus
so.
one, plus more. So what could the interaction between us and a higher dimensional being, if I'm saying that's God existing in
Mhm.
whatever, however many dimensions he is, what does that look like? And it's probably a good chance we're not going to get it all right.
Yeah.
But at least the tradition I'm practicing now is the Eastern Christian tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy.
Which I want to get into with you and kind of have you
Sure,
explain that to me because I
sure,
I was raised evangelical. You know what I mean?
same,
So, okay, so I
yeah,
don't really like and that's the thing. Especially now doing this show, like I don't really know the difference so much between a Methodist, between a Lutheran, between these. So that's where I'm actually trying to do my research so that
yeah.
I know that if one person says I'm a Lutheran, you might what was I reading that? I don't know if it's Methodist or Lutheran or Presbyterian, but one of them it was actually kind of fascinating. I was watching a podcast, and I guess when they die, they don't believe in heaven or hell. One of them doesn't believe in an afterlife. They believe that God put you here on earth, and that this could be your heaven or hell, and then when you die, you're dead. So, and again, I can't say which one it is. So therefore, I need, especially doing a show like this, I need to amp up my game and know what I'm talking about as well.
Hey, and as long as we can all, hopefully all of us, wherever we stand, we can at least be, I've got more to learn. I don't know it all. At least I think at the bare minimum, the Christian journey should look a lot like what John the Baptist said. He must become greater and I must become less. It's a life in pursuit of constant self-denial and humility. That's
Which is
that's the
very
core of the Christian faith.
which is very Buddhist and it's very Hindu at the same
Yeah.
denying of the self gets you closer to the ethos of godlyhood.
And like I was saying before, it's like some of these other religions, the ones that are focused more on mysticism,
Mm-hmm.
the ones I find to be the most interesting overall. And so Christianity, which most people don't realize, came out of the East.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism is in the East, so of course we're going to see some overlapping. In as much as we might have different opinions, we also probably have some similar stories. That whole thing, Epic of Gilgamesh has a
Mm-hmm.
similar recording of a flood. Same way that we see recorded in Genesis.
Well,
So
and
there's
that's
always
yeah.
overlapping truth. Yeah, it's
Well,
very
and that's the
interesting
thing is,
stuff.
stories from the Mediterranean were coming out, thousands of years before Christ. I mean, you have,
Very true.
the Egyptian god. You have, Krishna from India. You have, Mithra. I mean, there's so many ones that were, born of a virgin birth. Crucified, had disciples, did miracles and whatnot. So
Hmm.
when you have something that obviously is so much more older than Christianity, how can you not look at that and say, okay, man, maybe they ripped some stuff off, you know what I mean? And this version can't be the truth. Because I mean, I actually just watched a really interesting uh, 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 segment on, and I'm going to get more into it. I didn't get to see all of it, but science always says that civilization is only about 6,000 years old. Well, now I guess they have found in Turkey the Göbekli Tepe and Göbekli.
Oh yeah.
This new massive mega structure that they are now dating. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, just moving this chair out of my way.
No, go for it. That they're now basically dating back, 12,000 years old. See, and that's where I like the science more than the science. You have your hypothesis, you have your structure, then you have your research, and then you have your findings. And science is always willing to be able to be changed depending on, well, we didn't have this information. That's where I think the problem I have with a lot of Christianity and any of the religion is there's no will, there's no bending. This is absolute. There's no question. It has to be this way.
Yeah, at least. Yeah, I would say at least you see that more prominently through certain branches of Christianity. Whereas like you find the mystical arms of certain things like, I mean, at least in the Eastern side of things, the experience begins with entering into unknowing, because if God is the creator, the creator is infinite, he cannot be known. God cannot be known. So If you think you know something, then you immediately, that's not God. It might be a help for you in going forward. So the East is always, shouldn't say always, but commonly, they use a negative approach to theology, theology of negation, speaking more about what God is not versus what God definitively is.
Exactly.
And you maybe even counted some of that in some of the study you've done with the rabbi that you're working. But I found it to be a really interesting way to do it. And it's not to say that there's nothing. My saying that doesn't mean you can't find value in the opposite approach. But I think as soon as we start postulating the absolutes, that becomes really tricky because then you have to turn around and defend it.
Exactly.
And then once you're found wrong, that means you are wrong. And you think about this. I have a friend that I've known, lives up in Maine. He and I met, and he was a minister. Mm-hmm. And at some point in his life, and I hope I'm not getting his story wrong, but at some point in his life, he was told it was either science or faith, and he chose faith. So he went with it, and he became a minister and everything. And then he just started reading science. And when you start reading some of the science stuff and you pull one card out of that house of cards that's built, the whole thing starts to come down. And then you start really, and to me, it's like, dude, these are two different fields that measure two different things. We're not going to, I think you were talking about it with Jimmy or George. I don't remember who it was, but somebody was talking about the wilderness wanderings. There's really like no hard archaeological evidence for those wilderness wanderings.
Oh yeah, we were talking about the mass exodus of Egypt.
Yeah.
It was a Jewish, it was a Jewish from Israel, straight up from Israel, archaeologist that came out. And I mean, he was not ostracized, but he was very much, talked down upon. But yeah, he was like, there's no way this could have happened, especially with as many Jews as they said were in captivity at the time, 2 to 3 million. There's no, within one day it would have taken at least 6 months to get these people out of there. I understand an allegorical story. And if Christians would take that more as an allegory other than a hardcore, Ritter's Last Ark kind of situation, it's okay to say, maybe this is just a good story, but it doesn't really hold up historically or truthfully.
Well, and at some point, I mentioned this on Joel's podcast too. I said at some point, the Christianity changed its starting point from being about Jesus Christ to being about what the literal text of Scripture says. And that came, right around, the Enlightenment, reactions to the Enlightenment, the skeptics, and there was this kind of this need in Protestant Christianity to try to bulletproof the text. And we're just going to say that this text is inerrant. And again, so going back to what we were saying, it's like as soon as you make that absolute claim, now you have to defend it.
Yeah.
And then you end up starting to defend things like, okay, well, then we have to defend like the literal telling or the version of scriptural history, and the Bible. I don't think we could ever take the Bible, and it wasn't meant to be taken that you start on page one and you end up on the last page of Revelation
Yeah.
and somehow make coherent sense as if this is like some novel or history book, like the life of Charlemagne or something
Yeah.
like that. And that's not what it is, and that's not what it was intended to be. I think especially you would.
I would agree with that. Well, and
Yeah,
especially since, I mean, especially with the sacking of Alexandria, where, we lost most of the world's, history up until
huge.
time. So I
Yeah.
mean, don't even know, how many thousands of other, I'm not going to say cults in that way, but,
No, no, I understand what you're saying.
different theories, I mean,
Yeah.
this thing over time is just, Catholicism has changed. Christianity has changed. You know what I mean? It seems the only ones that really have not changed are the more, hardcore Eastern, like left-hand path kind of mysticism with Hinduism and Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure even, those have their, their separations and their differences. But it's just, it's
So,
fascinating, and that's the thing. That's what always just bothers me so much is that people just they don't want to learn. They're stuck in this on this ride. That's saying, all right, man, I started this ride. I got to get to the end, and there's no way I want to get off this ride and try and
yeah.
look around and see what else is going on.
Mm. So, and then, we could go back to that. Why do we have to defend what it
Mm-hmm.
is we believe then? Why is that? Or why did Christians bulletproof the text? Like I guess if you have to bulletproof something and make it
You're
such that you now
afraid.
have to defend it. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I was going. And then what are you afraid of? Don't the scriptures tell us? I mean, doesn't Jesus tell us and his disciples say, perfect love casts out all fear?
Mm-hmm.
So what are we afraid of? And that's the part that's always driven me nuts in the modern time. Like, what are we afraid of?
All right, so explain your religion, the Eastern Orthodox. I don't know
Yeah.
much about it. So tell me,
So,
what you guys are about, especially, being an actor, I mean,
yeah.
you know what I mean? It's one of those things where I was like, oh man, if he's a Kirk Cameron kind of guy, you know what I mean? I was like, I don't want to talk to a dude like that, but I would, you know what I mean? It might not be a smart, back and forth, but I would at least have the conversation. But
You're good to ask that
right, man,
question. Yeah.
you're definitely been in some social kind of relevant, series, and like especially being a Christian, like in Mr. Robot and House of Cards. I was like, how do you find one after you tell me about your Eastern mythology? How do you find being a theist in basically the movie business now or the TV business? Is it harder? Is it does it just no?
I don't find it that way. I mean, honestly, I would say most people I get to know in the industry know exactly who I am. Know
Okay,
that I'm a deacon in the Eastern Orthodox churches.
cool.
And, I got a small my leveling up actors group I'm part of. We've got a small group of actors who are working hard to try to take it to the next level. I mean, I would say at best, most of them are, or at least one of them is maybe somewhat spiritual, but
Okay.
most of them are kind of agnostic,
Mhm.
atheistic, and like, dude, like they on my ordination day they sent me a nice bottle of whiskey.
I
Everybody
appreciate it, man.
knows.
I appreciate
Yeah,
you having a drink because
yeah,
other than George and his coffee and Bailey's, which I thought was pussy, you know what I mean? I was like, really, man? Like,
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with even if you're a believer, having a smoke or you know,
yeah,
drinking a beer and having a conversation. You know what I mean? I think that's the one thing that always just, especially in the Christian metal realm, that always bothers me is I'm
right,
always seeing like, I like Slayer, but I can't listen to Slayer. What
yeah,
alternative can I have? It's like, dude,
yeah,
if you listen to Slayer, just listen to Slayer. You don't have to take their words
yeah,
literal. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like just
Well, yeah, and that was the parents were afraid that their kids were going to start going out like and sacrificing, whatever. And by the way, I watched that documentary, dude. It was awesome. The one that
which
you
one?
recommended, the kids in Arkansas.
Oh,
Oh,
West
yeah,
Memphis 3, Paradise
yeah,
Lost.
yeah. I watched all three of those, dude.
And
That was
it's rough, man. It's not uplifting, man. It's rough.
it's rough. And I keep going back to, and I'm telling some of my other good buddies in the Christian world. I said, like, check this. They bring a guy onto the show as an expert and the expert in the occult.
Uh-huh.
And the defense stands up and says, I have a pamphlet here from the school that you got your master's degree from. This
Yeah.
is a pamphlet you filled out? And he's like, yes.
Yeah.
How many classes, how many hours did you take? And how many classes did you take? None. Okay. Here's a PhD. how many classes, how many hours did you take? He goes, none. And he goes, Your Honor, I moved to strike this person as an expert on the occult. He clearly has no, and then the judge says, he goes, oh, well, in the state of Arkansas, I believe it's not required that you have, a certain amount of training. But if you can demonstrate you have this, work in the field, and you can prove yourself to be an expert, I think that question is ridiculous. I'm like, I was on the floor going, I cannot believe I just heard that. Like, they're going to include the evidence of this guy who has no experience other than probably what he's heard, or at least at the time there was no internet to do with all the research. But
he did a Ramada Inn 30-minute, class.
Satanic,
like those guys that get, the bounty hunter license in one day. They get
yeah.
And
right.
they quick, hour, like, all right, here's a chokehold. Here's what you do. You know what I mean? They're not.
Well, look what John Oliver did. He immediately applied for, what is it, the Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption, and he created a church like that overnight. Wow. And he's doing something good with it. He's doing something good with it. He's taking all that money and sending it to Doctors Without Borders. So,
that's so great. That's the thing too. I said this with George, and I think you'll remember that too. Is especially having tax exemption, I think churches need to be very much accountable for what that money's coming in.
100%.
And
100%.
No, I said that with Joel. That was with Joel, and I will say I'm not saying Joel lies or anything like that.
He's a good dude.
He's great. But I have maybe his church is the exception when he's like, oh yeah, we do that. We have meetings, once in a while. I'm like, wow, man, because like growing up, 20 years in the church, that never was brought up, man. It was just
right.
like collection play,
Yep. No, I hear that and understand it. Let me go back to I'll come back into that. So the Eastern, if I go back to the Eastern Christianity, so sometimes the versions you hear of it today are Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox. And so if you want to, so if you want to do like a quick historical dive to kind of like build the tree, Jesus, the apostles, the churches grow slowly. There's like house churches in Galatia, Asia Minor, all those. Well, after the time that the scriptures were written, the churches continue to grow. And then soon Constantine comes along and it becomes Christianized. Mm-hmm. So the church continues to grow. And then the state of Rome itself, Constantine also split them into an eastern half and a western half.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the short of it is those churches continued to grow over that first millennium along those political lines. So, I mean, this is effectively church and state merged together.
Okay.
At that point. So, and in some ways it was helpful, and in some ways you could see where there was some crazy stuff happening here, but it could be helpful in some ways. So they continue to grow. The West speaks Latin as they grow. Predominantly they're Latin speaking. The East is predominantly Greek speaking, which contributes to their tensions. And then, because it's so huge, they also have other small little differences that go along as well. The West started relying more on the authority of papal supremacy. The East was never about that. Okay. And so, there's this arbitrary historical date kind of assigned to like, I think 1054, where the church is split. This is called the Great Schism. I think that's kind of a misnomer, but I mean, that's what history puts in our books. So church is split, and then you have the Catholic Church of the Latin West, or it's just the Catholic Church. They're speaking Latin, which is why all the Catholic services were done in Latin for so long. The Eastern Church then becomes the Eastern Orthodox churches. So you've got Rome and Constantinople as their two heads. Now, we probably don't know. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And we probably know far less about the Eastern Orthodox churches because, we grew up in a predominantly Western civilization, of which Catholicism, the Anglican Church, the Episcopal churches here, and the Protestant churches, that all comes from, Europe, Western Europe and into us. That's why we know that so much, but we're so probably less versed in Eastern Orthodox stuff.
Okay. Because, when we brought up with Constantine when he took over, and that was 2 or 3 centuries after supposedly, Christ was crucified and whatnot. And,
like in 318 AD-ish, around that time.
About 3 centuries. So at that point in time, from my understanding, that Christ wasn't a deity at that time. He was just more of a prophet, maybe not, godlike. But then, especially since you have the Gnostic Gospels, where Constantine came in and they basically came in and figured out which books were going to be, constant and not constant, but what's the word?
Canonized is what you're thinking
Canonized.
of.
Thank you. That was the word I'm looking for.
And actually,
And then,
that's where I would disagree with you. That's actually, I would say, is not true. But
okay.
go ahead, finish your thought.
No, that was my thought. That was my
Yeah.
thought on that was, the research I've done was, 3 centuries later, Constantine comes off and says, all right, we're going to make, Christ, the deity. And so therefore they figure out which books they're going to put into canon to make the Bible and whatnot. And, cause like I've read, the book of Magdalene and the book of Judas, and the book of Judas makes Judas a very different person in his book than it does in the Bible.
Sure. Yeah, and you could say the Gospel of Judas, per se, was written. It contains like anachronisms in it, in a sense that kind of gives us an idea of when it was written, which was much later by Gnostic groups, which is fine. I'm not like crapping on Gnosticism, but one of the constant things you see in Gnostic themes as they write is they always take the bad guy and flip it, so it's the good guy. So you'll see like Cain kills Abel, but there's this idea that Gnostics have this idea, and I'm not an expert on Gnosticism, forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but they had this idea that, the true human is, the spark, the divine is within, and the flesh is what is bad. All of this materially created stuff is bad, and we're longing to escape. So, there were some Gnostic Christians who thought Jesus was the way to teach us the secret. Gnosis means knowledge in Greek. So they believed in the secret knowledge. Somebody has this secret knowledge that can, allow us to escape from the trappings of our, bad human flesh or whatnot. So, and I would argue that some Christians today still believe in kind of bad human flesh and wax is kind of Gnostic and they don't realize it.
Exactly.
But I mean, that's what the Gnostics believe. Going back to the Gospel of Judas, it's like they're writing so far in the future about something that took place then, but using like 3rd, 4th century terms. You kind of see it's kind of, if you opened up one of, I think N.T. Wright kind of put it very nicely. He said, like, if you opened up one of Napoleon's diaries and it started talking about nuclear warfare, you'd be like, I wouldn't call this a historical document, but, somebody's writing something that was meaningful to them, nonetheless. So, but to the notion of Jesus being only a prophet, I would disagree with that. So if you're following Jesus, the 12 disciples, Jesus teaches John. John teaches a guy named Polycarp. Polycarp teaches a guy named Irenaeus, who wrote one of the earliest sort of defenses of the Christian faith. And they are speaking of Jesus in very divine terms going through that. You couldn't look at those terms and just simply go straight to, you couldn't look at them and say like it was just a prophet, because the idea that exists, and you're going to find this again on the mystical side, the Eastern Orthodox side, is what is salvation is largely about your experience with God through theosis. Theosis being the fancy term, sometimes called divinization, but it's the means by which, I want to make sure I say this right. It's the means by which you, as a human being, Simon, myself, all of humanity is created in the image of God and designed to be, designed to become like God. When Jesus is talking to the Pharisees in John 8, I think it is, and he quotes the Psalm and says, "But you are gods. I have said you are gods." Our modern Protestant translations turns the word gods into judges, but gods with a little g. Like, they're not saying all humans are going to be like part of the Holy Trinity, but gods in the sense that you can be divinized and you can learn to become much more like Christ, like Jesus, than you ever thought. So, we have some accounts, though they're very rare, of some people experiencing and doing things like the Transfiguration, where Jesus goes up on the mountain and there's this divine light that pours from their hearts. You see accounts of people doing things like that, and this is where people end up with gifts of healing, gifts of, whatever else comes from that. That could be prophecy. There's been some holy monks that have been on mountains before where people have gone to seek for, say, I need to have a confession, and the person kind of already knows what you've done and what you're ready to confess before you even got there. Just little things like that, by being tapped with, it's you being connected by the Spirit to Christ and back to God the Father. in this divinization sort of. You don't really see this in the Protestant churches. So
and that's an interesting take, and
yeah,
that definitely sounds like a lot of like Hindu mysticism going on there.
and
Where,
you see that
yeah, where that's the thing that when I
Sufis
read
too.
about Jesus, I don't even so much think about a literal he is the Son of God. I think he was from things that I've read now and going back and rereading things. I think Christ was telling people then, like, if you follow the teachings that I can give you, I can put you in the pathhood to Godhood. Not that there's an Almighty Father above us, but that I can put you in a sense to where you can have the peace and tranquility and enlightenment in your own personal self, to where you become your own God, not in a sense of healing and whatnot, but
Sure.
just more in a mystical thing where you're in control of your life, and therefore you get to higher levels of consciousness.
Well, and at least taking that idea, that's the whole idea for us
Yeah.
in the garden. Being created in the image of God means we have the capability to reflect divinity. We're not going to be divine by who we are because we're created beings. We're not uncreated beings like God is. But the created can reflect that of the uncreated. Sometimes they use the image of like trying to dust off the mirror, that's kind of like tarnished so that it can reflect like the way the moon reflects the sun's light. It's very illuminating and beautiful. Things like that, which to me was an entirely radical take on the Christian story. Obviously there's this idea that, and I don't take Genesis as or the fall as like a literal encounter, but it's telling us something that happened. Human beings chose egoism over they chose self-love and egoism over divine love in this case. And this is where I'm huge on free will, because I don't think you can truly love without free will. This whole idea that you'd be predestined, reveals a different God than what Jesus is talking about in the Gospels altogether. And one of our theologians says, like, if that's the way God is, that's a God to be rejected.
Yes,
If
and
it's
that's a lot of the reason why I don't think that from what I've learned in church and what I've read in the Bible, that God is a God worthy of worship, and especially coming back once, I'm going to get to that in a second, but
yeah,
I'm going to kind of flip that script on you where we're talking about free will and whatnot, but in a lot of cultures, especially with Lucifer and Satan, who became Satan and whatnot, he's actually, the morning star, the bringer of knowledge. He's actually in a lot of cultures the savior of mankind, because he's coming.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because he's coming down saying you don't have to bend your knee. You don't have to you can be your own God. You can be not even God. That's just, you can be free. You can, why be a slave and not have the knowledge? Eat of that fruit. Know what God knows. Know what I know, and therefore that's when you're truly going to be free, and you're no longer going to be a slave to God. And that's a lot
Fascinating.
it's very interesting with like Luciferianism, and like I explained, which a lot of people still will give me comments and they don't understand it. Satanism is not real. It's atheistic. It's, you know what I mean? We were talking about that with Roger. Church of Satan does not believe in a literal level. And a lot of other cultures believe that Lucifer was actually the savior and the friend of mankind, who saved us from tyranny under God to where we were able to be free. And that's
that's interesting.
Free will is from Lucifer.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very cool flip of the script on that. So but that's the thing, even in what I'm reading, and like I said, I'm going to start working with a rabbi hopefully and really get their take on it. But for me, if Jesus was real, that's great. He was I think a very just kind of, like you said, Eastern mysticist kind of, had some really good ideas and whatnot. But if we look at the character of God in the Old Testament, in my opinion, that is not a God that I would ever want to worship. You know what I mean? Who would ever create somebody with flaws, punish them for not being able to live up to what they messed up in the baking process? You know what I mean? If I made horrible cookies and made you eat them and say, "Oh man, it's your fault," you didn't, that's a weak analogy, but still.
But I get what you're saying, and
it's like, how can you blame us as human beings and damn us to eternal damnation when the Creator has the fault in it? It's not us, it's the Creator who made us this way, who made us faulty, and because we didn't do what mom and dad said to do, we're grounded for eternity. You know what I mean?
Well, and if eternal damnation exists, I think you can easily go back up the chain and say, here's where the fault lies, and that goes back to God, and like I said, like some of our theologians have been like, that's completely rejected. That whole chapter that Paul talks about in Romans 8 or Romans 9, where he uses that whole analogy of like, here's where, God chose to harden some and not others. Like, I remember wrestling with that all the time, like trying to make sense of it. And this is the problem when your starting point is scripture, you're trying to take everything as truth, and in some ways you check your brain at the door. But if you follow Paul's thinking, when he gets to chapter 11, he undoes all of that and says that all will be saved. So if you believe in eternal, like this, some type of eternal punishment, it contradicts what Jesus told us of the Father in the Sermon on the Mount. How many of you, if you ask your son, if your son comes to you and asks you for a loaf of bread, would give him a stone? Yeah. How many of you, if they ask for a fish, would give them a snake? I mean, this is the imagery that Jesus is asking us to lean into with God the Father. Like if we believe in eternal damnation, the possibility, and this is it's always a hard question, especially when you and we've always grown up with this possibility. And side note, I think this is where all the fear comes from in so many Christians, is because they're afraid of going to hell if they do something wrong. But if there is an eternal damnation, does every knee truly bow, like Paul says in Philippians? Does every tongue confess? No. If one person is left to die, suffering eternally, what parent, do we know today that would be like, I'm going to discipline my kids and I'm going to work with them and discipline them? But at the very end, if they choose not to walk away, I've got this, this torture pit over here that, I'm sorry, but my kids will have to go into that, and we would look at that as sadistic. We would look at that as torturous. But if we just say it's theology and you apply it to God, it's good theology. I mean, come on.
Well, yeah, and I disagree, because that's the thing. As mortals and just basic humans can say that's wrong, that's not godlike, that's sadistic, that's immoral.
Right.
But then, what does that say about God, who would allow that?
Exactly. I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm like, how can we call that good theology? It's not good theology. It's bad.
Or even, that's the thing. If God has such human emotions where revenge is prevalent, so how is he such a higher deity than us?
Yeah, if he has human emotions, and that's the thing, is we have to go back and like use that negative theology and say, God does not suffer from human passions.
Yeah,
God does not suffer. God is not an angry God, which we see that in the Old Testament
a lot.
But that's why, I mean, at least I would say from our perspective, and I know this is true of some Catholics as well, our starting point is not the scriptures. Our starting point is Jesus Christ. We understand the scriptures through Jesus Christ. When you see what happens in Luke 24, he meets the disciples on the road, that road to Emmaus story, where they don't recognize him.
Yeah.
But there's a moment. Yep. And there's a moment when they finally recognize him, and they recognize him after he opens the scriptures and he breaks bread with them. And that's the parallel that we have in our churches today. We go to church and we open the scriptures to hopefully have our eyes opened and learn a little bit more about our faith from God. And we break bread together through communion or Eucharist. But I mean, in that same story, those disciples understood, and it says that he immediately went back and he revealed to them all the places where the scriptures, basically everything, Genesis through, was it Malachi? Everything through those, where it pointed back to him, And so that's where we have to come back in and at least say we have to understand the Old Testament through them. We do, on our resurrection service, we listen to 15 Old Testament readings, which include Abraham sacrificing Isaac, everybody crossing the Red Sea. And we're never sitting there going like, wow, what great history. But we sit there and we look at it and we say, how does this point toward resurrection or the things that Jesus taught us, or baptism, through the Red Sea kind of thing? That's what the early churches did, was they listened to these, they kept looking through the Old Testament scriptures to see where Christ was revealed in those texts, or like prefigured, you could say in another way, not to look at that and say this is literal, that this is a literal happening.
That's such an interesting take on that, because I've never really heard it spoke that way. But even for me, sitting back, even, if I was going to church and still just really kind of was more focusing on what Christ did, but still having to go back for the lessons, I would still take those as more allegorical. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, and that's the Origin, if you remember him, I think it was Yeah, and if I misquote him, I'm sorry, but if it's not Origin, it's one of the other guys. But it would say if you're not reading scripture allegorically, you're not reading scripture.
Yeah, man,
So
this is. I will say, man, I mean, and there's no disrespect to anybody else I've talked to, but like your knowledge of scripture and mysticism and whatnot, like I'm very much impressed. It actually makes me want to
eh,
study more. No, very
yeah,
much.
yeah,
It makes me want to look into these things, even though I don't think it's going to change my mind because
yeah,
I want to see more evidence and I would like to see more hardcore proof, you know. But if I think if Christians were coming at it the way you were coming at it, we wouldn't have
mm,
this I don't know. I just think a lot of the church just very much reeks of discrimination and hatred and bigotry. You know what I mean?
100%.
Uh,
And again, what are they afraid of? What are they afraid of?
yeah,
You know, and
and I don't even know. I mean, okay, let me ask you this, especially
yeah,
being in show business and whatnot. You know, I'm
yeah,
sure you work with you know a lot of you know gay people and homosexuals and
yeah,
whatnot. You know, I think that's the problem that I have so much with Christianity today is that you know I don't think it's fair that they're coming off at, whether you believe in homosexuality or not, your religion does not give you a basis to put anyone in a position where they can't live their best lives. You know what I mean? And I think, especially in
agreed.
the last 20 years, or probably
Yeah,
30 years, you know, Christianity has really just kind of zoned in on these two major things being abortion and and
and
homosexuality.
homosexuality, yeah,
And
and that's what it's all based on. You
yeah,
know, it's like everything hinges on that, and it's like it's not to say that the church hasn't always. I mean, I can go back through history and say the church has always had a body
frowned upon.
positive has a body positive approach, and you know you see the writings as early as the Didache that say do not terminate a pregnancy. So these have gone all the way through, but I would at least say that the modern movement pushing against abortion is very politically motivated, and it
Mhm.
started with the religious right. They
Yeah.
really I mean they actually had a stance at one point that was like, this is regrettable, but if it saves a woman's life, there are instances that we can see in which it's something that we should allow and be compassionate about.
Very
And
much
now
so.
it's not even that
Yeah,
anymore. It's only about political motivation.
yeah.
So
But I
and
mean,
here's
how?
the
Oh,
go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going. And here's the other thing we have to look at is so many of our, the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, they're the extension. It's a faith that is a very old faith, and in some cases, it takes a long time. So, like the Catholic Church, they have a pope. He can say
Mhm.
something, and it's done. The Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't have a pope.
Yeah.
It doesn't. So ours has been, if you want to look at it in a crude analogy, the Catholic Church looks a little more monarchical, like there's one guy at the top and can change it. Ours is a little more republic, democratic,
Mhm.
but it also means you've got to get all people together to talk and have meetings and actually talk. And I honestly think we need to get together and have another ecumenical council.
Mhm.
Technically speaking, we can't because Rome's out of communion with us. Ecumenical means you have to have like the old
Yeah.
five
Mhm.
cities of the patriarchate there.
Yeah, it'd be like
Um,
the five New York families sitting down, in the '50s to figure out, the mob families. What was
yeah, but we're still, when it comes to issues of homosexuality in the body, we haven't developed, at least on the Eastern side, we haven't developed a very cogent theology of the body. Our understanding and our working of the body still comes from the ancient understanding of the body, which was that men's bodies are superior, women's bodies are inferior,
Mhm.
and men's bodies are considered like basically they didn't understand how to work with what is this thing of menstruation? So they saw women's bodies as inferior. They are moist and cool, whereas men's bodies are hot and dry, the superior. And it's like, dude, today we know that's not true,
Yeah.
but you'll still see in scripture Peter talks about women as the weaker vessel.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's
Yeah.
just evidence, and I don't think Peter is like less enlightened in his work towards his own salvation in Christ, through Christ to God, but I do think he was operating off of an ancient understanding of what the body was, and we have not updated those today. That's why I think homosexuality was such a strong. Uh, they had such a clash against it because it's like, well, why would you, as a male in the superior body, be receiving, another man? I think that's kind of
I hear
how
you. Yeah,
they
and
sort of work.
that's
Yeah,
the thing. I only really know of like one or two scriptures, in the Bible, and I can't, say what books they were from, but I remember one being taught, man should not lie with another man and whatnot.
right. Exodus. Yeah,
Exodus, yeah.
Yeah.
that's always just bothered me so much is that, you look at a man shouldn't lie with another man, but you look at King David, who was revered, one of the greatest kings of all, and
Right.
his best friend murdered and impregnated his wife. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he's still
Oh,
revered
yeah.
as one of the greatest kings of all time.
I mean, that was rape. I
Yeah,
mean, if you look at
exactly.
it that way, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and it's such a refreshing, really talking with you about this, because you get so many Christians that just are like, "This is what the Bible says. This is what it is what I believe." You know what I mean? And
mhm.
at least you have, I would say, in the sense of a real soul, where you're actually like, all right, maybe this really isn't as prevalent as it should be in these times because these were written, thousands of years ago, and we need to bring some things up to date.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing that Orthodoxy has always had the ability to change with the times. It's just a matter of whether or not it's going to change with the times and how
Yeah.
long it takes for it to change with the times. You know, it's so interesting. There are these canons that come from these ecumenical councils where you can actually see like how outdated these things. How about this? We just had Easter.
Mm-hmm.
So Easter is celebrated for us. You know, you might always see that the Greek Orthodox ones or the other Orthodox churches are always like a week behind,
Yeah.
Western
Okay.
Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back in the day at that first ecumenical council in 325 AD, we all came up with a formula by how we would calculate Easter. And the reason for that was because, short story, some people were celebrating in the empire, some people were celebrating Easter on the day Jesus was crucified.
Right.
Some people were celebrating it on the Sunday right around the time Jesus was crucified because Sunday was a significant day. It's the Lord's
Right.
Day,
Yeah.
and it symbolizes resurrection. So we need to actually celebrate it on a day that symbolizes, discrepancies. So they came up with a formula that was the first Sunday after the first full moon, which
Okay.
follows the vernal equinox. So it's
Okay.
got to be
Yeah.
the equinox, the full moon, and then the following Sunday.
Okay.
So that was also an old calendar. That was the Julian calendar back then, under the
Okay.
Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
under Julius Caesar. Yeah. So calendar has updated to the Gregorian calendar in the 14th century. So the Western Church has acquiesced and, gone with that. The Eastern Church, short answer, has not. And to make it worse,
Okay.
to ensure that to ensure that everybody was celebrating it on specifically the same day, some guy named Meton of Athens calculated all the dates that Easter would fall on going forward like 3,000 years.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and now we know today in 2023, I mean, we knew this, hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
His calculations were also off by a little bit.
Okay.
So we're celebrating Easter on an astronomically incorrect calendar, mathematically incorrect calendar, and I would say ecclesiologically, like based on what the church canons have provided us. So in the Eastern Church, this is an example of the times have changed and our science has gotten better. However, at the time, that was the best science we had and we followed it. There's no reason not to, for us to, and that was like what, the 500s?
Yeah.
Science was better than it was in the time of Jesus. So, and clearly they followed it. So why shouldn't we continue to science doesn't get to dictate our theology, but we can at least look to it to help us do better with our theology.
And I agree with that. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, even look at the last 30 years. I mean, science has come. I mean, look at the day of, the first computer that would take up a warehouse. Now we have a phone, you know what I mean? I mean, just right here, we have everything we've ever needed. Right. We can look at anything. We can, talk to anybody. I can video call you when you're in Indonesia and see it and hear it and be part of it, and that's where, and I'm a big fan of Dawkins, and I agree with 99% what he says. But there are just points in time where, that's the thing where I say I like science because science is never rigid. Science is flexible. Science, where if I have this data, but this data turns out to be wrong because of new information and new data, then we get a new hypothesis and a new result based on that data. And therefore, science will change with the times.
Sure.
That's why, when people ask me, like, what do I believe in? I believe in science, even though science can be flawed based on the person doing the research, the intent the person is doing the research with.
Yeah, you get some egotists there, and that can be a problem. You could look at what was his name, Andrew Wakefield, who did that study around like vaccines and autism, and he really popularized this whole thing about and for a while I was like, oh man, and then I realized, oh my gosh,
Yeah, he did.
That's an example of bad science.
He
Or
did
no,
12,
good. Yeah.
yeah, he did 12 patients, a 6 week study, did not get it peer reviewed, didn't go through the proper channels. I mean, and I will say, my mother is one of those people that says, that read
Yeah.
that, like, this is 100%. You will not change your mind, even though he was disbarred. His science came back and was, rejected from all of his other peers, and it's no longer even valid in the scientific community.
At all. But that also then becomes one of those instances where you could say, okay, this was a big head in the scientific world, had an agenda, and he somehow got it published in the
Yep,
Lancet. But then it was science in the very end when people started saying it was science that figured it out.
exactly.
They said, oh wait, we can't replicate these studies.
Yep,
I'm not sure about this.
exactly.
Like so. I don't know.
Exactly. So
But
with
it's
with
yeah.
Eastern Orthodox, do you actually believe in the blood salvation of Christ? Is that still part of Eastern? With you have to accept him as your Lord and Savior. That kind of, like, especially if you came from the evangelical world, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, the blood of Christ cleans all, or is that just more of a, as long as you're kind of like working with God?
No, we clearly believe in the crucifixion, but I mean, our emphasis is on resurrection.
Okay.
The whole idea of the crucifixion and the death was that Christ willingly chose through his own free will to go through this, but it's the idea that Christ took on human flesh because as a way to link all of humanity together. So you have God who comes through a human being, which a woman, by the way, that should be significant. He gets his human side from a woman. And he chooses to take on the one thing that is common to all humanity, which is that we die. Christ died. And this is the sort of link that happens. Is there forgiveness of sin that comes from the cross? Yes. But these are things that we continue to sing today, and we still continue to ask for sin. But Christ wins the victory over death. It makes more sense if you realize from the beginning, at least in the Eastern train of thought, we don't see we don't see the fall. The primary inheritance of the fall in Western thought is sin.
Mm-hmm.
The primary inheritance from the fall in Eastern thought is death. Death is what has gone on. And if you kind of look at it as a parable, all of those people in Genesis, as they sat outside the garden, now death is a reality. But they live a really long time. They live in like 1,000 years. And as time goes on, as you theoretically get further from that holy space, they don't live as long. Maybe they only live 500 years, and then they're living to 300 years, and then it's 100. It's like as they get further from the source of that uncreated divine love, which is what we see God as uncreated energy, uncreated love. As you get further from that, it's like your life source sort of dies. That's kind of the.
No,
I
see that.
You see what I'm saying?
That's interesting. I've never.
And therefore, Christ comes to be, Christ comes in to have fellowship, to help us understand what it is to be God, to live like him, to like the Sermon on the Mount, all of these things that he tells us to do. And these are things that when I was growing up in evangelicalism, we weren't taught a whole lot of that.
Yeah,
it was more just about believing in Jesus, punch your ticket into heaven, and that's it.
Accept him as your savior,
But we believe you still grow after you die. If you just think of it from a scientific perspective, something that is finite, that is now unfolding into the infinite, that's going to be a lifelong, it's going to be an eternal process. Exactly. So, going into the afterlife, it's like, we believe you'll be in the presence of God. Okay. How you experience that, if you've lived your life in darkness, if you're, use the extreme, if you were a Hitler type, that's not going to go as well for you, in the sense that, like, I like the analogies of energy. So if you're using the idea of like, I sometimes say, like, if you've been out with your feet in the frozen snow and you try to get into a hot tub, that's going to hurt.
Yeah.
But it's not the hot tub's fault that you're out in snow. Yeah. So, or, there's another one I used in a sermon I had to give once, where it was like these miners trapped underground in Chile for like 50, 60 days had to come up to the surface with sunglasses on.
Yeah.
But because the sun was going to hurt their eyes. And so there were people there waiting for them, didn't have sunglasses on. And there's people in the dark. So it's like you have an energy source that is causing pleasure and pain to both. And it's not to say that you can't eventually learn to experience the goodness and the warmth of it. you can. It's just up to you how you want to do that. Do you want to stay with your sunglasses on, or do you
Yeah,
want to
no,
take
I
your,
hear you.
eventually, yeah. So that's kind of the thought on
Well,
the
that's
afterlife for us.
such an interesting take, and I mean, and that's the thing. Maybe if growing up, I think more people would take that kind of stance instead of just being so hardline and so hateful about things.
Yeah,
But here's also what I was going to get back to that.
yeah,
Especially
hit it.
the impregnation of Mary. That definitely comes from Zeus was doing that, coming down, taking forms, mating with people, but also in a woke environment. I'm going to say this about God. He didn't consent Mary. You know what I mean? He just came down and, let's just say, he raped her. You know what I mean?
Oh, interesting.
Think about that. Think
Well,
about that.
doesn't
Mary has no idea, that God is chosen her. God's never communicated with her about it. He just impregnated, and then finally some angel shows up and was like, "You're knocked up by God." And then you not only that, then you have a husband who you're trying to explain that, I've never been touched by a man yet, but I'm going to be carrying, God's child. You know what I mean? We were talking
yeah.
about things in a modern term, man. Like God kind of raped Mary. So
Well, I would. So I see where you're coming from, but I would say I
here,
think the scripture actually says. I mean, Mary says you will be with child, but she also consents to it by saying, she says, "How could this be? How could this be? To me." And at one point, she says, "Let it be done to me according to your will." And to
yeah,
me,
I'll have to reread that because I don't remember that ever.
fine.
But
Yeah,
and that's the thing, man. I have not read scripture in so long. If this would have been 25 years ago, I knew so much more. But I've been
yeah,
up until I started this program. That's where I'm coming at. It's like, man, I got to start boning up in my chops so that I can
that's cool, man.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
even so, it's just like that's the thing. Even with all these great stories and whatnot, somebody said this once and it made me laugh. If faith healers and that kind of thing worked, we would not need head doctors. You know what I mean? There's so many. Like my mom would take us down. My mom was a big fan of Benny Hinn. Do you know who that guy
Oh,
is? You know?
and then when you start talking about wanting to get what's his name on there, the occult master on Joel's show, you're like, who's the shyster guy?
Oh,
The
Bob
occult
Larson.
guy. Yeah, Bob Larson. I was
Bob
like, oh
Larson.
yeah, you got to get this guy in your show.
Well, I would love to, man. I would love to talk to Bob, especially like I saw a few years. He's all wearing a Catholic stuff now and has like these three like girls that are like his exorcist team. I'm like, what are you doing, man?
Oh yeah, you did. And aren't they like his young enough to be like his granddaughters or
They
something?
were at that time. I don't know if
Okay.
the same girls now, but when I first saw him on some talk show back in like 2003, no girl was 18. There were three girls. One was like 16 and two were like 17. And he had the full on, Catholic priest garb on. And I was like, well, okay, man, I get it. If you're an exorcist, you're going to go by, Catholic ritual, which is very hard to be, sanctioned by Rome. Now if you're just doing the evangelical, demons cast out kind of thing, you don't need
Right.
a guard for that. So
Right.
I don't know where he's going with that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting when you look at that too, because you have examples in scripture of people who try to do that very thing and it doesn't go well for them, and sometimes those are kind of like warnings that we don't heed. I mean, was it like the seven sons of Siva and like Acts where they come along and they're trying to drive, they see Paul performing a miracle, and then they were trying to do it and they couldn't do it. The disciples at one point tried to drive out, a demon and they couldn't do it either.
Well, is
So
that
what
where
if
when Jesus finally just put them in the pigs and let them run in to?
that may have been one of the examples, like he
Okay.
he drives them out of like, one area, but in another area where, the disciples clearly are trying to emulate the whole thing. But this is where I would say, like, I'm not at a point in my own. I mean, I've been a Christian for, I would say maybe a One Bad Pig show. Like, I know you listened to them back in the day. I saw them in high school, and it wasn't like I said the sinner's prayer per se, but I think that's the moment, and at least when I had like an emotional experience where I was like,
Totally.
this is going to be part of my journey. So, I mean, that was in '89. So I'm all this far, grown in my faith, but I don't have a gift of driving out demons, and I would never presume to do it unless, like, I knew for certain that there was something in my heart that God was speaking, like that I'd been gifted with something, or, the way I understand people who've really tapped into like the salvation story, like some of these monks who spend their life in prayer, and then suddenly, like, they've learned to sort of cast off their selfishness, their egoisms, their anger, their rage, their greed, all of that stuff. they learn to cast it off, and it's like there's this warmth that comes into them, and they just kind of have this communion with God. And sometimes God tells them, some of these guys are out hanging out with animals,
Yeah.
which I think is actually really cool. And I read one story about a group of people that were coming up to the mountain to see one of these elders, Elder Paisios, who's now a saint in our church. And one of them got scared and like threw a rock and killed a snake. And the guy was like, "You killed one of my snakes." You know, when he, like before he even like, this was like an hour before. So like just some of this interesting, communion that they take on that like maybe was there, in the Garden of Eden beforehand, kind of this reuniting of between God and the creation.
But again, it's all based on your belief and your faith, because I mean,
I can't prove it. Yep.
That's the thing, and that's for me. It's like, I think I stunned George when I was talking to him. He's like, "Well, what if God would show up to him and revealed himself to you?" And
what if he did, or what if he didn't?
If he did, and first off, I'm going to say,
I don't
know what evidence would really change me.
Yeah.
And second, if he did, me personally, man, just if it was the God of the Old Testament and of what I was known, I don't think I would still want to be his disciple. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I would say, like, at least remember if you ever wanted to go this way, like, just remember that if you're going to look at the Old Testament, you always go through Jesus Christ, and you look at his example. And that's what the early church did. There were so many people in the early church. It wasn't just they were trying to emulate Jesus Christ, but they would, if you think about him as a man who took on suffering, who willingly chose to suffer and die for people. That's also what they tried to do. Some of them were going and selling themselves into slavery to win somebody else out of slavery, to liberate, the idea of like liberation, back then.
I think that's just a human thing. I don't think that's a divine thing. I think that's something where I would trade places if my wife or my kids were in trouble, and it was like, you or them. Take me. I'll go to jail. I'll go to the electric chair. You know what I mean? I would much rather do that for my family than see my kids hurt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would validate that for you, even as a person who is an atheist or agnostic.
I'm an atheist.
Atheist, yeah. For someone who's an atheist, that's totally valid. I would say for this person, it was somebody who had, at least when we see the recordings of their writings, they were very devoted. So for them, it was a part and parcel to their faith. So, and I think both can happen. We see examples of stuff like that happening.
All the other crazy corrupt, throughout, like you look at like Jim Jones, cult that drank all the Kool-Aid.
Nuts.
I don't know what they're called. That weird Mormon sector where it's all the young girls getting married off.
The fundamentalist LDS.
LDS, thank you, Latter-day Saints. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the thing, is that and then, you look at like, Joseph Smith, that's the thing, is that through history, yeah, we can prove these people lived and that this happened and this happened. But at the end of the day, how in your heart can you say, I've got the one, I've made the right choice?
I mean, this is something I can't prove to you.
No, but I'm just saying,
but
for you,
it's very real to me.
You're like, I know I'm doing right by.
Yeah, I'm doing right by myself. But I mean, and honestly, I think, and I hope this doesn't sound too old school fundy, but it's like, I think in every aspect of our life, there is something that we place our trust in to a given end that does require a little bit of faith to some end. Not saying that proves God, but other things that exist. If you're doing like mathematical proofs, there's always still a little bit. I mean, even, gosh, have you seen those images that came back off the James Webb Space Telescope? The James Webb Space Telescope that's out there.
I haven't.
Yeah. So they've had images that have come out over the past 6 months that are just gorgeous. And one of the most recent findings they had, and I love this stuff. I love the night sky. I love everything of the cosmos. They did a recent study. It wasn't recent. It was a recent snapshot where they were looking back at least, because of the time dilation and everything. So when they're looking back that far, they're seeing galaxies now that were formed within like 500 million years of origin, which is really young. And what was settled science at the time was that those things should be at least like half the size or half the mass of, like, say, the Milky Way. But with this image, they found it was only off by like a tenth. And so And, so for them, it was just like, they were like, well, this is going to upend settled science. But for a time,
Mhm.
they couldn't necessarily prove it the way they can prove it now, but there's a little bit of faith, just a little bit of faith,
Yeah.
but so there's a little bit of that creeps into all of what we do. Obviously, there's something more concrete that goes into science, and that's why we need science. We need that as a tool so that when we go have our doctors, operating on us or creating vaccines for us that are very beneficial that I think we should not ignore.
Or
You
having,
know,
experts that are not, that have real
right?
PhDs and
Yeah,
real
yeah,
experience other than something you printed off from the internet. You know what I mean?
right. Well,
So,
and it's so funny. I've told a number of people. Like I had a friend who worked quality control for Moderna during that whole thing, and
mhm.
I would just be like, man, I just want to tell you, like, I'm not trying to tell you what to do. Do the right thing for yourself, but like, I have a friend who worked quality control for Moderna and oversaw the whole vaccine process. Like,
Mhm.
if there was something to be told that was dirty going on, he's the kind of guy that would have blown the whistle, and everything went as it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
but I mean,
Fortunately, I had two good friends actually die from COVID.
oh
Um,
man, I'm
well,
sorry.
and that's the thing is, I was talking to my father, and my father is interesting. And we were at my sister's house having something, and he brought up, the whole, left wing, agenda. We're all just trying to,
Right,
put microchips in people. And I look at my father. I go, first of all, man, I go, your phone in your hand, they have every bit of information they need about you. They
100%.
don't need microscopic little cameras in your bloodstream.
Yep.
I go, and
Yep.
secondly, I go, you saying that is offensive to me because I had two friends. It's the same. It's the same thing of when people like, well, HIV patients, they didn't die of HIV, they died of complications of pneumonia. Well, brought on by the HIV. It might have not
Yeah.
been the HIV that really got you, but the same thing, where,
Yeah.
because these people already had very compromised immune systems, they got the COVID, they weren't able to fight it off, so they died of another cause, and then that's when my father had to be like, right, I'm just going to watch what I say. I'm like, cool. I go, if you want to believe that, that's great, but at least have the science to back it up
Yeah.
and just be a little bit more respectful of people that maybe have been going through something that you can't understand and don't want to understand.
Yeah. That's too bad, man.
Yeah, it's a and that's the thing, we're all going to die someday, and that's I
Right.
have so many people ask me, they're like, you're not afraid of death, and I'm like, not at all. I'm not afraid of dying. I don't want to die.
Good.
You know what I mean? I'm not seeking death. I'm not like running out in the middle of the street, fucking around, but at the end of the day, I've had a great life, and if I die, and I do stand before judgment, man, I don't know. That'll be an interesting thing, But I actually heard. I was talking to me and my wife and our friends went out for dinner one night, and our waiter was he's a gay uh, church of the. It's it's kind of like one of those hippie churches. I can't remember what it's called. Unitarian.
Oh, Unitarian Universalist.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we were having a
Yeah.
conversation, and he actually said something that I haven't had time to look into or do some research, but I found it very, very interesting. And he basically said that when their interpretation of Christ and Calvary is when he came and shed his blood for sins, that meant it covered all sins for all people at all times, so that when you die, whether you're a believer or not, you still make it to heaven.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing about like universal salvation. I mean, when Jesus Christ says, "When I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself." I mean, that's John the Apostle writing that. There's there are so many places in the New Testament that talk about all people. And we've relegated that in the modern church to, well, sort of all, but some. This one of our theologians, David Bentley Hart. Like you want to talk about somebody who like blows your mind. He's really thoughtful, very skilled in philosophy, and he'll just say like, well, that's like saying Jeff Bezos has enough money to feed every woman and child in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an understatement, I would say, but only certain people have access to it,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. You're like, what? So is God so limited in his power, that he's not able to? And he goes back at that point, like Christ dying was not a death for a certain chunk of people.
Mm-hmm.
It says it was for all men. And we see in Timothy, it is the will of God that all men be saved. So if somebody's left out of that, what does that say about God's will?
Hmm.
Like, are we, there's so many places in the New Testament that discuss the idea of universal salvation. If we are all created in the image of God, meaning that there is a spark of the divine that exists within us, and God is going to assign that and allow that to be assigned into eternal torment. I mean, that there's something
Yeah.
that's not logical about that. Like, so God's going to assign like something he created out of love, and he still loves it, but he's going to assign it to eternal torment.
Yeah.
Like those are the really hard questions that somebody who believes in that. Now, I think it hinges again on like that analogy of if God is uncreated energy
Hmm.
from which all things flow, it's up to us to sort of warm ourselves up to the likeness of that energy when we die, so that when we die we're closer to that. And if we don't do it in this life, we're going to continue to grow towards it in the afterlife, but it's probably better to take care of it now than in that time versus
It's kind
like
of like maybe the Abraxas theory, where as a human we might not have salvation, but once we die, that energy gets back put into the universe and basically swirled around into the universe to where we get put back into something else, and it's just a constant, which is a very very Hindu, very left hand path,
it's
very
kind of interesting. Yeah.
you know
Yeah. And when I think about it, it's like that's the real question is like, is it possible for someone to this is the question I'm always left with. So you take like the worst of the worst person who thinks I'm it. I'm like, I need to be the smartest person in the room. Think of some of our politicians right now. I need to be the smartest person in the room. And when I get there, what's going to happen when you're not the smartest person in the room? And you're not the most, I should say, they're not the smartest, but the most important person in the room. And there's somebody else that might not go very well for you. Or picture somebody who's been addicted to like some sort of chemical.
hmm
Now suddenly you're cut off from it.
hmm
You're going to go through a period of time where
oh
you're
yeah.
you're recovering. That's kind of how at least we in the Eastern Church see it. In the afterlife, Christ died for all people. Otherwise, everything that is written about in the New Testament will come undone.
hmm
Paul's argument that all will be saved. John talking about when I'm lifted up on the cross, all men will be drawn to me, and he's alluding to the desert wanderings. The image of when the serpent was put on the stick and everybody who looked at it, was saved. Does that mean that, Jackbag Joe over here who's been beating his kid, is going to be excluded from that, because he, even if he looks at it, there's all
But
this image.
no, yeah, I hear you. I mean, I mean, that's the thing. The either exclusion or exclusion is just such a hard situation, because I definitely know people through, not personally, but throughout history. If I were to look at somebody and be like a Stalin or a Hitler or a Dahmer or an Ed Gein or something, and be like, well, first of all, I don't believe in this term evil because of Satan. I believe that they're just
Yeah.
bad.
I don't need there to be a Satan to know that evil exists. Like I know
Exactly.
the crap that's in my own heart, in a
Exactly. And
sense.
that's the thing. When I say the word evil, I don't want to, project it as some sort of, because Satan made them do something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, there's definitely people where it's like, especially with Catholicism, where, as long as, you, before you die, you confess, and, to a Monsignor, I could be standing next to Hitler in heaven. And, I don't think that would be a right situation. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So I don't know, just the philosophy and just the concepts and everything. I think nobody's ever going to get it, because we are still just a bag of meat in a brain that only works about 10%. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and I think that's the thing. I think salvation and enlightenment does start here. I don't think it starts with a sacrifice or blood or a book. I think it
Mm-hmm.
starts if you sit down and just can figure out in your own life how to be, and I'm not saying the best, because the best does not exist. There's nobody that's the best.
Good
You
call.
got to be, for you in your life, a better man, a better husband, a better father, a better. And when I say worker, not like a company man, but like doing the best job you can do, and making sure that you're doing the right thing by the people that are paying you. You know,
Yeah.
in whatever journey or endeavors that you're doing, as long as you're able to come home and have peace in your soul at the end of the night, and don't have a heavy conscience, I think that's where we start to get enlightened, to where we don't have to have all these other external bombardments coming in, where we can just sit down and focus on our life. And that's the thing, I mean, I think it was Joel that asked me, he was like, well, what do you believe in? I go, I believe in me.
Sure.
I believe that I'm not saying that I don't have great friends and great family that are a backup system, but at the end of the day, I know that if there's something that needs to be done, I have to do it. I have to be able to have the strength, the cunning, the smarts, the ability, and sometimes it's hard, and you fall, and you have to build yourself back up. But I think at the end of the day, my salvation, and my oneness to come and starts here, and it starts here, just where I get to work on myself.
Well, and honestly, that's maybe where we have like stuff in common because
Yeah.
when at least from a faith perspective, as we're trying to grow in Christ likeness, we have to start with ourselves.
Mhm.
So often I think we're trying to go out and I want to go do X. I want to go build a house in, Mexico or whatever, but like, what about yourself? Are you still doing, what is it we have to know ourselves, man. Like that
Exactly.
old Greek proverb, know yourself.
Hmm.
And to me, like that is always a first step. And for you, if just knowing yourself that's where it's at, great, awesome. And for myself, if knowing myself helps me to better understand who I am in relation to the eternal, in the uncreated love and energy of God, that's where I need to start is to kind of figure out my own craft,
Yeah.
and that's not an overnight process.
No,
Yeah.
I don't even think it's a 10-year process.
Right.
There was a Jewish proverb I read about people who were wanting to like repent for themselves for their sins. Basically, for whatever sin you do, you go to an authority and you get put in prison. And for every you were by yourself 7 days a week for as long as it takes for you to sit and contemplate your sin and your or not maybe not your sin but your crime, to where you're able to then basically, I guess the theory would be where you enlighten yourself to know that you're able to go back out in the world and uh, reciprocate in goodness what you've done times 10.
Mm,
Yeah, very
that's
interesting.
awesome. I think
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
and that's the thing. I mean, I think at this point in my life, I think especially, I think Christian and atheist both have a good and bad connotation to it. You know,
Sure.
I think when the atheists hear Christian, they're like, this, and then when Christians hear atheist, I think you and I both are an anomaly. I think we're both very different, but
Mhm.
also I think that the conversation and the moving forward as a society, we all need to just start listening to each other. And
Huge.
you are more than welcome to have your belief system. I don't want
Yep.
to take away anyone's belief system.
Yeah.
I just don't want your belief system to infringe on my rights. Where
Yeah.
a lot of Christians are very tyrannical, where they're like, we you have to believe what we believe, and you're going to vote the way we vote, and we're going to take certain rights away from these people, and the way you do, how to what you can do with your body, you know,
I'm with you, man.
you
Like
know,
in as much as I'm with you, we agree that I don't want the state to influence the church, and I don't want the church to influence the state.
yeah.
We have seen really bad stuff over the past 300, 400, 500 years. I mean, beyond that, inquisitions. I mean, you have to think that when the founders were creating, what was a great document at that time.
Yeah,
I mean, the witch trials weren't that far off from that time,
exactly.
So it was like, my gosh, that's crazy. So they had to, I mean, say what we want about them as slaveholders and whatnot, but it's like they were still pretty educated, and they
Yeah,
built a system that,
it wasn't
um,
perfect, no, but it was the start of
yeah,
something better.
right. In should they have been slaveholders? No, I'm not for any of that, but they were very educated, at least to create something like that had not yet been done. So it's, man, and that wall of separation, I think, is so, so necessary. And this is where I think, honestly, the irony comes in because there are so many Christians that are trying to win souls to save them from this eternal hell that they believe in.
Hmm.
But in the process, they're creating more atheists
Yes.
along the way. I think one of the greatest, everything I was told as a kid was like, you have to watch out for secular culture. Evolution is going to make your kids atheists. And I'm saying, I think there's a lot of bad words I want to say. I think that's a pile of crap,
I
really.
agree.
I think the biggest thing making atheists right now is other Christians, pushing their jackbag notions on other people,
Hmm.
and just acting like, you know,
Well,
total asses.
yeah, and that's the thing. It's tyrannical, and it's imposing will.
Yeah.
Christopher Hitchens said it best. I'm not trying to take away your toys. Keep your toys. Keep your faith in your toys.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't make me play with them.
Yeah.
And don't make your toys make laws that I can't play with these kind of toys, or these kind of toys aren't allowed in my home, or that I'm allowed to love. I mean, that's a very simplistic analogy of what the man said, but it's very much rings true.
But why the need? Yeah, but this is the other thing I was going to say earlier on, was like, but why the need to prove what you believe spiritually? Like, I get that you want to have a defense for your faith, but honestly, I have a faith that I believe in, and I don't feel like I have to prove it to anybody. I'm happy to talk about it like we're talking about right now. I love this conversation.
Yeah, but for me, it's just, if I'm going to, especially being raised in the church and everything that I've been through in my life, when it comes to the church hurts. I don't believe the church helps. I think it's not antiquated in a time that they're still doing, and very strict parents that were Christians and whatnot. I think that the church not only teaches you to keep your eyes, ears, and nose closed, to where you're not having any other stimuli come in, to where it gives you an informed decision. That's why I'm such a big proponent against like Sunday school and whatnot, because it's indoctrination. There was I'd seen some clips of it on YouTube, never really watched it until about 3 weeks ago, and there's a documentary called Jesus Camp. And
I've seen it.
Well, I didn't realize that Lee Summit is 20 minutes from where I live.
That's right. You're right there in Kansas City.
And watching those babies, those kids cry, and put that kind of pressure on these children, I believe it's mental abuse. You know what I mean?
I would agree with you there. There's nothing.
And I will say the two sweetest kids was the rat-tailed kid, Levi, and that girl. Yeah. And I was the same kid. I remember us going out to do mission work when I'm like 10, 11 years old. And when that girl walked up to that other woman at the bowling alley and was like, God's putting something on my heart. I need to come talk to you. It's like, you don't even know how to drive a fucking car. You know what I mean? Like, you can't, you don't even know what division is yet. Don't tell me that you're this spiritual guru that can just, put your little magic wand out there and walk up to somebody and be like, I'm 10 years old and you're 30, but you're incomplete because God told me so. It's not only an insult to the religion, but it's also an insult to people and these kids are just crying, and this woman, and that's what just pisses me off so much, is that it's this fear-based mongering where you are brainwashing these children. And no different than Mormonism or anything else. If you're a Mormon and you get away from the church, you are just ostracized. You've lost your friends. But you know what? Maybe that's what you need to lose to be free.
I couldn't have stated it better than myself. To be able to find yourself. And that rat-tailed kid from that documentary too. Like, the part that killed me was like when the mom was teaching him about like climate change, and how the kid like immediately and I was like, what is this? No, what? Oh my gosh! Like, climate again, science. It's like, why are we relying on these materials to teach us about climate change? Like,
It's not a slight to God to say, hey man, things are changing in our environment. We need to do something about it.
And humans are doing, and we should that's one of those tenets I think that exists from the creation, is like, God created something beautiful here. Why are we so intent to just throw ourselves at the heels of just unchecked capitalism and just let it all be ravaged?
Yes.
So I know you're a capitalist, but I'm not like,
no.
I'm saying
unchecked
capitalist.
Here's the thing. I believe in capitalism in a sense where anybody should be able to start up a business and work for themselves. I am not about capitalism at all. Walmart, Targets, all that shit, man. All that has done is killed unions and killed mom and pop businesses.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's funny. I own a small business, and 2 doors down, a Marco's Pizza, which is a pizza place, is opening up. And I was talking to the investor, and man, whatever happened to just being able to open a business? I mean, it's costing this guy $1.3 million.
Just to start it?
Just to start it. I'm like, and I look at him, I'm like, how the hell do you guys get financing? Like, if I walked into a bank looking the way I looked, I'd get you know what I mean? They'd be like, here's $12. Go get something, But that's the thing, is that capitalism has made it so hard for the mom and pop and the little guy to even compete in business. It's not even worth it. You're not going to succeed. you're not going to see it against juggernauts like Walmart,
No.
Target, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, back
And
to
I'm with you on that.
yeah, back to the Jesus camp. The funny thing
Oh
is,
yeah.
when Levi was in that church at Colorado Springs when he was watching Ted Haggard.
Oh, I remember you had the story with Ted Haggard too.
He was our pastor when we lived in Colorado Springs.
Man.
And I always, you know, I'm not saying I have like awesome atheist senses or whatnot, but even at like 12 and 13, I always like, there's something false about this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was always something false, you know?
Well, and I think one of our really good kind of monk guys who's he's an archbishop, but he would always say, "We hate most in others what we fear most in ourselves." And I was like, that's one of the most
Yep.
basic pieces of spiritual advice I always look at. So when you see like that being manifest, it looks like that in Ted Haggard and many other people today that are constantly harping on, and then suddenly, oh gosh, they're found in a bathroom stall with so and so doing whatever else, and it's like, well, I was experimenting. It's like, you're doing some pretty hard drugs. That's not experimental drugs, my friend.
Well,
I think you've
what
been.
pisses me off too is that, you know, everybody comes back in the Christian realm with and I'm not talking about anybody that's been through a molestation situation.
Oh yeah, I hear you.
But it's that quick convenience of, well, I was molested as a kid, so this is why I act this way now. And if that sucks, you know, I'm not talking bad about that, but I think that's such the quick, easy answers. I had already a bad sexual experience, so therefore, man, you're a man, I'm a man. We've all had bad sexual experiences.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Male,
sexuality is really complicated.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. On a fun note, let me grab a soda. I'm going to give you about 10 more minutes and then I got to get some things done.
Sure.
But,
that's it.
You lived in Lawrence, Kansas for a while.
I did. Yeah.
I wasn't around for the coffee shop days. I moved here about 7 months after it closed down. But I want to hear some of the experiences you had in Kansas City at the shows you went to. Because I have a bunch of friends that went there and saw, like, you know, MXPX and you know, I guess, you know, they always had even good secular punk bands come through and whatnot, like DRI.
Oh wow.
That's what I heard. I don't know. Like I said, I moved here and I moved to Kansas City in June of '98, and then I was here for a year. Then moved back to California for a while. Then moved back here in about 2001. So, was G Coffee around when you were out here?
What was G Coffee?
It was another local.
That doesn't sound familiar.
It used to be off Quilvira. It was a coffee house, and then and then by the time I moved here, it was out where I live. It was just a big punk building that was super hot and smelled real bad. So
that doesn't ring a bell. I remember the street name.
Okay, if you were only here till '97, then probably, and you lived in Lawrence, you probably didn't come up to Overland Park a lot for shows.
Well, that's not for shows, but I had a lot of friends at KU who were either from Olathe or were from Overland Park, the area there. So it was like there are plenty of them there, and you know, a number of them we would go to New Earth Coffee House and see the band. So I remember it was, you know, because they're being in Kansas City, being between the coasts, you know, between East and West Coast. You get bands that would stop by along the way. And Sheldon, who was the pastor there at the church at the time, he would just, I don't know how he did it, but he was able to bring in a lot of bands, and like a lot of the good bands. So you didn't necessarily have to go to like Kemper Arena to see. Kemper Arena was usually reserved for like DC Talk or you know, whoever, like Olivia Smith,
that kind of stuff. You know, WWF kind of stuff.
At the time,
Kemper 3 times. So
I
will say Kemper's been shut down and closed for about 20 years now. There's now we have the Sprint Center, which is like the huge new thing. But some of your like the good bands you got to see while you were
Well, I remember my freshman year, so seeing the Crucified, like they were one of my hugest bands at the time. I love, and I love it. That's awesome. 14. I always thought about getting a tattoo.
Got it. What? 14.
Wow.
And I'm 40. I'll be 47 in 2 months.
Take up your cross. I just turned 49, so oops, I guess I wasn't supposed to say that as an actor. Like, I don't know. Reveal your age. Censor that out. So the Crucified, you know, there were a couple of Kansas City bands that played there a lot. So Dig Jesus was there quite often. Sometimes they would be an opening.
Oh shit, they're from Kansas City?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, my roommate at the time, who sadly he passed away in 2012. He lived, I think in the Olathe area, but he knew a couple of the guys from Dig Jesus at the time.
Nice.
So yeah, so that was cool. Um, let's see, Prayer Chain,
Okay.
Sixpence. I saw a bunch. I saw a bunch of times there. The Choir. Yeah, my styles ranged
Oh yeah.
quite a lot. Deliverance. I think I only ever saw Cornerstone. You know, it was 5 years at Cornerstone at the time.
Yeah,
Only ever
I
saw.
never made it to a Cornerstone. I never got to go.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. Remember seeing Believer at Cornerstone, but not at the New Earth.
That's one of the bands that I think, man, horrible name, great fucking band. I think if
Yeah,
they
they're so creative.
name, I think
Yeah,
if they had a different name, they would have gotten a lot further because that's a cheesy name. You know what I mean? Yeah,
probably.
but
But
they
I
were
remember at the time, you always needed to have like an or like an ance at the end of your name to sound
yeah,
kind of badass, you know, in the
oh, yeah.
process. Um, gosh, who were sometimes there were just some other random bands that came along that weekend. Um, Now Waterdeep was a band. I don't know if you've heard of them at all. Don Chaffer and Brandon Graves. Brandon Graves actually went to the church that Sheldon ran there. And
Okay.
Brandon is one of the best drummers I've ever heard in the industry. He's just really like he's just on with everything. I remember at Cornerstone he played with Starflyer once as their drummer, and he played with DBD and XL. I don't know if you ever you
Yeah, for
remember that guy.
Dishonor, XL,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, right. I choose death before dishonor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is
So
crazy because there's a Boston hardcore band I'm good friends with that are called Death for Dishonor,
is that
and
right?
yeah, check them out, dude. I mean, they're good, but if you
I
like East Coast
will.
hardcore, you know what I mean. They're
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but yeah, XL, but yeah, Starflyer, yeah, man. Starflyer is one of my favorite bands of all time. He's still even
Yeah.
as an atheist. I fucking love Starflyer. Love them.
They're really good.
And I think they've gotten better as the years have gone by. The last album they just did, was it not Young on My Head? The one right after that. Man, I wish I could write music like that because I'm a bass player,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm just
Oh, cool.
yeah. But I've played punk and hardcore my whole life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just like I would learn. I'd love just to like play something chill. You know what I mean? But yeah, Starfire was great. I actually went to school with Chad Wiggins, who was the singer for Officer Negative.
Okay. Yep.
They're a big punk band
Right
from
on.
California,
Yep.
you know. And I actually went to school with Tim Mann from Focused as well.
Oh, for Focus. Ah,
Yeah,
fascinating. I liked their first album a lot. The second one wasn't as strong, I didn't think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
At that
But
point in time, like they were just basically doing Christian straight edge. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like they were
Yeah, yeah,
being Strife and Judge and all that kind of stuff, which is
yeah.
still great. Yeah, their first record just kills. Same with Unashamed.
Unashamed, it was one I never really took up. I think I listened to them a couple times, but I never bought any of their stuff. Um, there was one show I went to with my buddy Matt at the time when I was living in Santa Cruz. We drove down to the LA area because we heard Vengeance was doing a reunion show without Roger.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
but it was in a small venue, so we were like seeing all these guys with their hair cut, except for Larry Farkas. Larry
yeah.
still had the hair and everything because he's still playing, side gigging at the bars and whatnot. And I forget what happened, but there was one point at which they were like, does anybody know the words to He Is God? And I was like, I do. And they're like, get up here.
Nice.
So it was like, you got to sing with Vengeance, at the time.
And that's when Scott was doing vocals, the singer from Ultimate.
This would have been just before Scott got with him. This would have been like 98, 99.
Oh, wow.
When I was living in Santa Cruz. Yeah. We just randomly heard it. And we're like, dude, I've always wanted to see Vengeance.
Yeah,
Even if it's without Roger. I
yeah.
just want to see this. It is interesting being in the film industry and whatnot. Your bubbles get burst sometimes. There's people like I would love to work with, and then there's sometimes where you see things you're like, well, I don't think I really want to watch this guy's movies anymore because of what I know that this person is now like. And I'm not saying I'm an expert and I know all of Hollywood. I don't, but you still encounter some of that where you're like, I am really disappointed in this particular interaction.
Yeah.
Bubbles get burst. Yeah.
Believe me, man, I
In the
did
process.
security for bands for
Oh
years
yeah.
and years and years, and I met people I thought would be amazing, and they were just assholes. And
Yeah.
that's humans. I know that. I will
Especially
say,
when fame and money gets involved
oh yeah,
too. Then
not
there you
even paying
go.
the money, man. Get enough drinks in me and put me in a bad mood, and I'll be like,
Yeah.
fuck that. I will say the first Roger interview, was super cool. The second one, I will say, I was having a bad day.
Okay.
And I'd been letting YouTube comments get to me and piss me off.
Oh, yeah.
That's not my finest hour. That's not how I like to really portray myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was having a day. I was like, fuck this guy and fuck that guy, and I'm tired of hearing this. But that's the thing, man. I'm just so fucking tired of the status quo on both sides, atheists and Christians, man.
Were Christians coming at you on that one?
Oh yeah, big time.
Oh,
Like,
man.
oh, Roger's this, and like, dude, you have never walked what this man has went through. You don't know his story, you know. And
honestly,
is difficult to deal with at times. You know what I mean? He's a great guy, but you know he's going through a lot of personal stuff. I mean, it took me 2 years to start doing the interviews with him, of me showing him that I was not just trying to screw him or to get something out of him. I just wanted the story. That's it.
Yeah.
Now we're buddies. Now we text all the time. Like, hey man, what are you doing today? I'm doing this, and I got to do this. You know. But that's the thing. It's like this right here. What I'm doing. If I change some people to my side, great. If I lose people to your side, hey, that's your choice. It's all about having the interaction with people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if seriously, if we could try to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, like what's the whole passage in there about like, hey, if somebody asks you, to walk a mile with them, walk two. If somebody, if you have two coats, give one to somebody. Yeah. Like this is all about like helping each other, being part of it. This is giving yourself up for other people in like manner to Christ, having given himself up for all people. These are little ways in which we can do that to help us along the way. Ugh, that's rough. And I got to say with Flood, I remember really enjoying like some of that record. Then they wrote this song called Freeloading Larceny, and I was like, I listened to it and I was like, you guys are afraid of socialism. And then I look back through, like, I started following Gary's IG, and again, like his journey is his journey. I'm not going to say he can't do whatever he wants. It's his journey. But I did notice at some point, it sounds like he got a successful production career, and it sounds like he made some money, and he that's great. And then he found God again, and then now it's like, what? So now we're afraid of socialism? I mean, I feel like, again, socialism is one of those things that like is
it's a dirty word that most people don't understand.
Totally. And it's like
democratic socialism in this country. You know what I mean?
People not very well, but we do. Yeah.
It's not done well, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you're paying for your schools, your roads, your hospitals, your fire department, whatnot, through your taxes, that's a socialist fucking program. All of it.
And Medicare, Social Security. I'm glad my elders in my family have access to that because we don't take care of our elderly in this country very well. So
I agree. That's the thing too. It's like, I've said it, man. The Church of Satan pays their taxes, man. Why can't the other Christians do it?
So
all that money coming in, and I'm not talking just Christians. I'm talking Catholics, Mormons, Scientology. Actually, Scientologists did lose their tax exemption a year ago, which I'm happy with.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and I think especially as soon as a church starts to make political donations and does political speak, you're done. Like you're now a taxable entity.
I agree 100%. But that is cool.
It's like
to see a bunch of cool bands here in Kansas City. Like I said, it was before my time, but I was lucky enough to live in Southern California. So I mean, I got to see. I only saw Vengeance once, but that was when I lived in Colorado. And,
how was it?
Yeah.
Good.
That's if you listen to the George one, it's when George, we had moved from California. I went up to, and then he called me and I went up to work for the band that day. And then Tourniquet was a month and a half later, and I got to do that show as well. But yeah, I saw the Crucified 4 or 5 times.
That's awesome. Did you see them both with Jeff Ballou and then their old bassist too?
I only saw
Mark Johnson. Jeff, okay.
I saw him at the Reseda Country Club twice, at the Roxy once, and at the Whiskey once.
Awesome, man.
Oh, they were fun. Got to see Betrayal, Mortal.
I've seen Mortal a bunch.
Yeah, Mortal were fun. I was at the show where the band Everyday Life. Do you remember them?
I do.
Okay,
I didn't listen to them much, but
they were called Nicene Creed before that. And
no way.
And the night that I saw them, their singer Ted, who was called MC Colorblind at the time, because he was a rapper, he came up and did their rap metal stuff, and it blew up, and that's when they stopped being death metal and went to rapcore stuff.
No way! Oh, that's so cool. What year was that?
92, 93.
Because that would have been right around the time of.
It was right when Rage was getting big and Body Count had already come out. So
Well, I remember in '91, I think is when Psychosurgery came out, or '92,
That was
with
91.
Tourniquet, and that's when what was that?
91, yeah.
Yeah, '91, and so that's when on it was when PID on Spineless, I think it was on PID
Horrible
came
fucking
on.
song.
Oh, I love that
The
song.
rap one? Oh, it's
Yeah,
so bad. It's so bad. The metal shit was great. The rap part, when you got to it, was like, oh,
give me
this
the
is
track,
so
get back,
bad.
don't jive, no truck, no fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
I know.
was.
It was like, oh, but like with XL, when he came out doing his thing, especially with like Sodom in America, I was like,
Yeah,
this is how you do it, man. This is how you do it. And I remember
right.
POD's first record, Snuff the Punk. Oh,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right.
introduced to the devil. I was like, oh, that's so bad, dude. So,
Yeah,
but then also,
yeah.
I was lucky to be out there when like the Supertones were getting big and
That's
MXP
right.
and Wish for Eden and Starflyer. So I got to see a lot of those shows because
I never saw Wish for Eden. And I thought it
they
might be
were
kind of an interesting show.
they were
Yeah,
dumb.
it was. Well, it was a good album, but most of the songs sounded the same because he was running right off of that drop D sound. He was
Yeah,
just playing a lot of those open.
yeah. Every
But there were
song,
a couple of good tunes.
and then when
Oh
he split and did Rob Walker his solo record Strove,
yeah. Oh, that's right.
sounded just
Not so
like
good.
Wish for Eden.
But 6 Feet Deep. Do you remember them?
Oh yeah,
Dude,
good.
that first album, I cannot believe why they didn't blow up. I saw them live in Chicago when I was
Yep.
home for the summer one time, and it was like so good. And then whatever happened, their second record was just not as good.
I dig their second record. I like both of them. Just I think they're two different bands at that point in time.
It feels like it, but at
But I
least
mean,
the
they both
production values
great.
are different too.
But
Yeah,
not only growing up with punk rock, man, like I listened to a lot of East Coast hardcore, like Gorilla Biscuits and Judge and Youth of Today, and like they definitely had that East Coast, straight edge youth crew hardcore sound, which I was very much into.
man.
Like when Strong Arm came on the scene, I was like,
Oh yeah, yeah,
these
yeah.
guys, man, like they were legit. One, no
Was
doubt
that
about it.
Strong Arm or Stretch Armstrong?
Strong Arm, they're from
Strong
Florida.
Arm.
Yeah,
Okay.
Church Armstrong are great too. We actually, my
Yeah,
old hardcore band played with them once. So,
yeah.
and that's the thing. Me playing in bands also in Kansas City for a lot of years. We got to open for Blood for Blood. I mean, I played with Terror, Most Precious Blood. I mean, tons of bands. You know what I mean? So, I mean, Kansas City had a great scene from like '98 to about 2005. We had after G Coffee closed down, we had a place called the El Torion, which is a historical ballroom here in Kansas City. It's actually one of the first integrated ballrooms in Kansas, where blacks and whites would come in the 20s. And
Wow.
it's great, but it was our CBGBs. I mean, it was gritty, and man, if you messed up there, you got your butt handed to you real quick because there was no staff other than the people that loved the place and looked after it, like me and my friends. Like we were security. Like you messed up, you got thrown out real quick. It was
There
fun.
was one other band I sort of rediscovered, and I don't know why I came back to these dudes, but last weekend I was going down to see my buddies in North Carolina, and I had never seen South Carolina, so I just drove down there for a day just to see
Yeah.
it. And for some reason, this old band, um, Sacrament, I remember I had their album Haunts of Violence.
Uh,
Um, and I remember giving it like it was one of those where I took it back. I'm like, this sucks.
it
But I
sucks.
listened to it again and I was kind of like, actually, this was a lot better than I actually remembered it being. And I kind of liked Haunts of Violence. The second album I didn't like at all.
Yeah, the
But
second one. I actually, when Rocks Records put out Sacrament, I bought it because I hadn't heard it in so long, and it came out on
yeah,
vinyl. I collect vinyl, so I'm like, fuck it, I'll buy
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I listened to it once, and I was like, I get what they were doing. It doesn't hold up. Like you
yeah.
said, you were talking about One Bad Pig. I remember
Oh,
being
yeah.
so fond of that band and having until I learned what real punk rock was. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Then I turned. I was
Totally.
like, this isn't like I remember like right on when eBay came out. In like 2001, I found Swine Flu and Smash on eBay on CD for like $10 each. I'm like, fuck, I gotta buy these. I threw it in when it showed up, and I was like, ooh. And I'm not saying those guys aren't cool guys or couldn't play. Just
Sure, sure.
no different than like the Lead or Crash Dog or those other
Oh,
punk.
I forgot about those. Oh,
I was
wow.
like, dude, this you're not punk rock, man. I'm sorry. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
It
Well,
wasn't.
it's as much as they could say like DC Talk was rap. Remember those sheets? If you like
Oh yeah,
whatever, then you listen to DC Talk, or if you like
yeah.
Baron Cross, you'll love Def Leppard. People are like,
Totally. That's always
yeah,
been my issue. And I've said this on the Christian Metal Board a few times. Like, you don't need the alternative, man. Just now, if there's something specifically like with black metal that's talking about whatever or
That's
deicide,
off-putting. Yeah.
yeah, that's not into, cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you don't have to have the Sugar Splenda version of everything. If you don't
Yeah.
have it, like I will disagree with everybody. I do not believe in unblack metal.
Yeah.
Black metal, it was specifically made for a region and a place where you cannot reproduce it. It's not
Oh.
it's not for Christianity. It's anti-Christianity. It's for paganism and church burnings and whatnot. I'm sorry. Frost Like Ashes, I guess, is from here in Kansas City.
Yep.
And I've never seen them play anywhere. I've never even heard of this band until recently. And the corpse paint and everything, it's like, dude, stop appropriating shit that's not yours for Jesus. Come on, man. If you like black metal, dude, I love Deicide. I don't believe in the devil. I like Mayhem. I don't give a shit. It's
Behemoth.
like, if you're not listening to Mayhem, I swear to God, you better not be listening. Better watch horror movies.
Which, by the way, I'm a fan of good horror movies if they're done well. Yeah, I love a good horror movie done well. I'm not into the splatter stuff like that, but stuff that's good, man. I mean, The Witch, I think, is one of those. To me, like you want to blend like theology with like a good like horror, like they called it a New England folk tale, and then to me, like one of the most horrific things about that movie is just this theology.
That's
that these people
I have
believed.
It on my queue. I just haven't watched it yet.
So good. Oh my gosh, it's so good. The rest of the movies Dave Eggers did, he did The Lighthouse, which is also really good, but I mean mainly for the performances. And then he did the Northman, which is just very weird, but it's done very well.
Right.
But they kind of, whereas like The Witch to me is just like, this is it. Like this is just a great sort of spooky New England story, story that goes through it. But yeah, it's I like horror for what it can do for it. Like we like to go see people make us laugh. We like to go see rom-coms to make our heart feel good. We like to see other movies then have a good cry. This is just another emotion. Some people don't like to be scared. That's cool, but I think it's interesting to see what does make you scared. What does it reveal to you about yourself?
Yeah, that kind of like possession and hauntings, they don't scare me. You know what scares me? Silence of the Lambs, because those motherfuckers are real.
Exactly.
That terrifies me. I'm like,
exactly.
Those guys exist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I've never fallen asleep and had a guy in a fucking sweater and a Christmas sweater come and try and kill me. You know what I mean? I've never had a hockey guy, except for maybe being the band Slapshot. You know what I mean? Come after me with a hockey stick.
Yeah, right. Well, I got to say, the original Halloween, I think, is amazing. The original Halloween.
Yeah, the first one, great.
It's phenomenal. And then what was the other one? Oh, and I really like The Conjuring as well. The original Conjuring.
Took my daughter to see it in the theater, and I was just like, and that's the funny thing is that 20 years ago, oh man, this would have been all over the news and Bob Larson and people protesting and this,
right.
I said in my interview, like I didn't see The Exorcist for a long time because even walking away from theism, I didn't want to have my bets. I was like, man, like this could open a doorway to demons. And
I know you're always afraid of that.
Yeah, I don't want to, put myself susceptible to that. And then when I finally sat down, I was 22, and I finally watched it. I was like, all right, cool. Like it wasn't scary. I mean, there were some like parts, but
there's some definitely terrifying, like creepy stuff. Like when she walks down the stairs and pees the carpet,
inviting entities into my home.
It
made me
learn to be not afraid.
Oh shit, this is crazy. I mean, like it was scary, but it didn't make me. When I went to bed that night, I slept well. I didn't have one eye open waiting for the devil.
Right.
So and I remember that being in the youth group. I remember we had some special guy come and talk to us, about secular music and movies and how. And literally, I'm not paraphrasing. He basically stood there with his hands on his hips, like the devil has showed up in my room, and I looked up at him and said, "It's just you. Go away." I'm like, come on, man. Like, I'm just like, well, first of all, if the devil's real and he has this kind of power, like, you might want to be a little bit more not so cocky about it, But it's just those kind of things where Ichabod Crane and Sasquatch and all this other stuff, and it's just, and these are great fables, the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, and they're fun,
Right.
It's not
Well,
fun.
and it's like for me, it's like it's not like I don't think. I mean, I tend to think of like, okay, so if there's a Lucifer, he's created. If God has created everything with free will, they could choose to not, and
Yeah,
so maybe they've chosen to rebel, and that's their free will. But like, I don't focus on that.
yeah,
I'm trying to focus on what's going on in here and working out my own, all my own crap in the process.
I hear you.
So, I mean, I don't need a devil to tell
That's what
me.
I'm saying. There's enough messed up shit in this world where it doesn't have to be blamed on an entity or a spirit. It just we're humans, we're mammals. We are
Mhm.
still at this level of evolution, man. We have not learned how to we're getting there. Some of us are, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, within the last 100 years, we're doing better, but we're becoming more socially conscious and more, globally activist and whatnot. But we have a long way to go. That's
We
what
do.
like America's the greatest country. I'm like, look, man, I'm not anti-America at all.
I'm not either.
I'm not. But you know what? Look at the Roman civilization that lasted 2,000 years. We are
Yeah.
246 years old, man. We are not the greatest.
We're not going to last that much longer. And that's the thing is, I think like showing healthy critique for our country is a way to show
Yes.
that I care about us. I'm
Yes.
not, I don't hate America, but I'm grieving for like how much better we could be doing and how
Yes.
it looks like we're going downhill now, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So,
I
especially with the way we treat each other.
Exactly, and that's coming from two very different people that are still seeing the same thing, saying,
Yeah.
you don't have to be a Republican, you don't have to be a Democrat, you don't have to be a socialist or an anarchist or a Christian or whatnot. Just know our country's not doing so well. So let's come
Yeah.
together as a people, put all of our bullshit aside, and let's figure it out.
And I could say we could even look at some of those. There are some more right-wing European countries that are all on board with socialized medicine.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And I'm just like, why can't we? Like, I was in Germany last year, and it was like, there are people who make a living working at like those beer gardens.
yeah,
Like, they make a living there. They can live. They're not being gouged.
yep,
They're not being paid $2 an hour, €2 an hour. You don't even like they don't even tip the way we tip here. It's
yeah,
like if I gave the woman like a €2 coin at the end of the night, and she was like, "Oh my gosh," she's like, Dankeschön, and I was like, oh, sure, 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 no problem. That's like a chintzy tip here, of course,
yeah,
but they were, usually you just kind of round up over there, but
yeah.
they're very content and very happy to do their work there, and
Well, and
you
then
know,
we look at the opposite. Like when me and my wife went to Jamaica for the first time years, probably 6, 7 years ago, and we went to their shopping district that was like enclosed in all the shops, and we were getting souvenirs, and they were giving us free beer, and we got a little toasted that afternoon.
yeah,
And so the two ladies helping us after we were done, man, I ended up buying a fucking box of Cuban cigars for like $200. It was great.
how many?
A box, like 34.
Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh,
So
wow,
the guy at the store like took all the ribbons off and put Jamaican ribbons on them, but let me keep so that way, through customs and put them in a Dominican Republican box, but they were Cubans. But yeah, like at the end of the
beautiful,
day, we had paid for everything, and the two girls helping us, I gave them $10 each, as a tip, and they were just flabbergasted. Like, we can eat for 2 weeks off of this. I'm like,
oh my gosh,
$10 each. I'm like, God damn, like
right,
your government needs to start helping you motherfuckers out a little bit, man.
yeah,
He's like 2 weeks. I can go to the store. I will have food for 2 weeks. I'm like, man.
but do they have socialized medicine?
No, they don't even
They
have
don't.
that there.
Okay,
They're a very poor country.
yeah,
If it wasn't for American tourism, Jamaica would be screwed.
yeah.
Yeah. But on that note, man, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna get some
Yeah,
things done.
I know we're at 2 hours, so thanks for the
Yeah.
the good chat, man. Dude, I
Yeah.
really appreciate the good chat, dude. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a blast, man. Like this has been a great conversation, and I don't think I've changed your mind. You definitely haven't changed my mind, but you know what? I made a new friend out of it, and
Awesome.
that's all we can hope for in life is just, man, treat each other with respect, let everybody live their life, and just, man, if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, hey, you'll
Be
figure it out.
the be the best people we can be, with what we've been given. That's
Exactly.
awesome. And I'm gonna send you a list of some horror movies. And if you ever get any good like science links, dude, I'm totally down. I love that stuff.
Oh, I definitely will. There's some like I was talking about tonight with that new mega structure in in Turkey they found.
Oh yeah, yeah. Wasn't there some like weird? Isn't there like was it like Graham Hancock? Isn't he doing some kind of stuff about that place, or is
I
this like
think that's
actual
his
like
name. I wasn't able to
science?
get it all
Science.
down, but yeah, it's like 11,600 years, and I guess 90% of it they actually filled back in. Like the only reason they know how big it is because of ground sonar on it. But I guess this thing is like the biggest thing they've ever found. So
Send me that link. I'll be interested in seeing that.
I will, my friend. Thank you, my man.
Dude, thanks, Simon.
If you don't mind when I send this to you, if you want to post it on like your page or whatnot, let
Yeah,
your people watch it, and I'll post it on mine. And thank you, sir.
yeah. My are you on Instagram?
Nope.
Okay. I'm on Instagram. I'll make sure I post it there. If anybody's watching and you want to follow me, Sir_James Wilcox is my Instagram handle. And then yeah, we'll post it there, post on Facebook.
Yeah, I'll post it on my YouTube and everything. So
Yeah.
anybody watching this that's not a subscriber and likes the man's work on TV and music or in movies and whatnot,
Movies. Yeah.
Like his stuff, subscribe to mine, leave comments, man. I'd love hearing back. I love feedback from people. If there's information I was wrong on or needed to delve deeper into, and you want to, post a little thing or a link, I will be glad to see it, and we'll go from there.
Cool, man.
All right, man.
I'm down. Be well, man. Cheers.
Cheers.